Receiving incoming transmission.
Incoming transmission.
Incoming transmission.
I'm sure you have many questions.
Transmission.
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 Welcome to Transmission, a monthly show about the most impactful posts from our Meteor.js forums. My name is Paul Dowman, founder at OKGrow, and each month I am joined by Sashko, Stubailo, and other guests from the Meteor development group. Please note the contents of this show are the sole opinions of their authors. This show is sponsored by Meteor Galaxy Hosting, a containerized cloud service specifically designed and engineered for Meteor app deployment. Learn more at meteor.com/galaxy. This show is also sponsored by OKGrow, an official Meteor Prime consulting partner building full-stack web and mobile apps. Learn more at okgrow.com. Hey everybody, welcome to Transmission number 18. I'm Paul Dowman. Wow. Yeah, 18. I'm Paul Dowman, and I'm the founder of OKGrow, where we help clients build great apps with Meteor, and I'm joined by Sashko Stubailo of the Meteor Development Group. Hey Sashko, how's it going?
Hey man, it's going great over here.
Thank you for doing this yet again, 18 times. Thank you.
Sweet.
So we're here to talk about the things that have been interesting and exciting on the Meteor forums. And I think the biggest thing that we'll start with is the discussion of the upcoming release 1.5, which is already out and available to try, but not officially released. And I'll just quote Ben from the GitHub pull request on that one. Ben Newman from Meteor. He says, just as Meteor 1.4.2 took aim at rebuild performance, Meteor 1.5 will be all about production app performance, specifically client-side application startup time, which I'm very, very excited about. And the flagship feature is dynamic imports.
That's right.
So can you tell us a bit about what that is and how it works?
Yeah, so I think just a few things up front. One is that 1.5 is currently in a pretty early beta. So if you try it out, which you can do by upgrading to that beta, and you encounter bugs, that's expected. And if you find some of those bugs or things that could be better, definitely post about those on GitHub. Preferably on GitHub. Forums are also good. And and the other thing I wanted to mention is that even though dynamic imports are the main feature, it's not the only thing. We're also working on stuff like just making the core of Meteor a little bit lighter and removing some of the unnecessary dependencies.
Cool. That's great. I think anybody with a large app can attest that it definitely has an impact on the first page load, because you've got things like, you've got all of your JavaScript, but also something that people don't necessarily think about is all of your templates or components are bundled into that first JavaScript bundle. And even though it's minified, it can, in large production apps, get very large. Like I've seen well over in megabytes. So this is going to be a really big deal. So Webpack and other module loading options like JSPM, etc., can do these types of things. How is it going to be different in Meteor?
Yeah, so I think it's the same kind of feature, that's for sure. People have a lot of different names. Some people call it, code splitting, for example. Some people call it, system.import or whatever. I think that used to be the previous standard. We're calling it dynamic imports because that's the name of the current in-progress JavaScript standard. So if you go and look at like the TC39 JavaScript stuff, in ECMAScript 2015, we got the import syntax, and the equivalent of that for asynchronous module loading is going to be the async or dynamic import syntax, which is similar to import, but it looks like a function, and instead of returning the module right away, it returns a promise for that module. And so the main difference between what Ben is working on for Meteor and what you might see in something like Webpack is that in Webpack, you generate some specific number of bundles. So you have some entry points in your code. You upload, you run the build tool, and you end up with some number of JavaScript files. You upload those files to wherever you're hosting your JavaScript, and then it just handles loading those files at the right time. And the biggest difference with that and what Meteor is going to do is that Meteor is going to do what we're calling kind of exact code splitting, which is that it's going to treat every module in your application individually, whether that's an individual file in your application or an individual file in an NPM package that you're installing. So rather than running a code splitting thingy and ending up with like 5 JavaScript files or so, you're gonna run a server that knows how to respond to requests for individual sets of modules. And the main benefit is there are 2 main benefits, I would say, to doing this exact code splitting approach over the bundling approach. One is the obvious one, which is that with the bundling approach, you can easily end up loading the same code multiple times. Like if you have a component which is appearing on your front page, and the same component's also on the second page, the bundling system doesn't know which page you're going to go to first, so it has to put that component in both places. Whereas in the exact code splitting approach, by the time you get to the second page, it'll know that you don't need that component again, which can be some small benefit. The other really cool thing is that you can then cache every module individually. And what that means is with the work that we've had so far, let's say that you actually upload a new version of your app code. You redeploy your app. And you had a module in there like your, let's say you're using PDF.js to render PDFs. Not only can you split that module out and not load it in your initial bundle, you can actually never load it again, ever. As long as you stick to the same version of PDF.js that has the same hash of the content, when people upgrade to the new version of your app, when their browser reloads, it will actually be loaded from memory instead of being loaded from the server again. And it'll be cached persistently inside your browser. So basically, for large libraries, people literally only have to pay the cost of that library or module once, even across multiple days of using your application.
That's awesome. So you're not breaking the cache by updating some other small module. You're not breaking the cache for the other modules that haven't changed.
Exactly.
That's really cool. So I was a little bit confused by one of Ben's comments on the GitHub repository, which described the trade-offs between loading modules via HTTP, maybe from a CDN, that versus sending it over a WebSocket, I guess like via DDP. So, but you're talking about caching, which is making me think HTTP. But from Ben's comment, I took that it was going over DDP or at least over the WebSocket.
Yeah, so there are at least like 4 different questions here, which each have their individual answers, and maybe even it should be to a certain extent configurable which trade-off you're looking for. So yeah.
Well, maybe I'll start with the first one. Are they loaded by HTTP or over the WebSocket?
Well, here's the first question. So in the current implementation, I think in the beta they're loaded over a WebSocket, and the reasoning there is 2 things. One is, and this ties in with caching as well, like you said. The first thing is WebSockets will have lower latency. So if your app is a Meteor app in the sense that it is loading some data or doing authentication over a WebSocket connection, if you already have that WebSocket connection open, there definitely are benefits to using that same WebSocket connection to load your modules because the WebSocket's still compressed, just like your HTTP response would be. You don't have to make an extra connection, so the latency is going to be lower. So mostly there are benefits to loading with that instead of HTTP. And then there's caching, and the nice thing about HTTP is that it has caching built in. But then you enter this trade-off between caching a large JavaScript bundle or whether or not you want to load each module individually. And if you're loading different sets of modules at different times, HTTP caching might not be as helpful because loading, some set of modules and some other set of modules, even if they overlap, you're still going to send that request to the server. You're still going to get all the modules back. So the cache isn't really going to help you.
Right.
So regardless of whether you're loading over HTTP or over WebSocket, where there's some trade-offs there are benefits to doing module-specific caching, not just at the HTTP level, because then you can cache the individual modules.
So do you mean they're cached in like local storage or something at the app level as opposed to relying on the browser to do it? Okay.
That's right. So that's the second question, which is how do you cache the modules, right? So the simplest answer is with an HTTP cache. So if we wanted to do exact module loading and leverage the HTTP cache, you would want to load every single module as an individual file. Mm-hmm. And that might be possible with some more modern HTTP type stuff, like HTTP2 claims to reduce the cost of loading a whole ton of files in parallel. So with HTTP2, it might be possible to send individual HTTP requests for every module, and then maybe caching will be handled automatically. Then another option for caching is to use Service Worker. And what Service Workers let you do is basically, my understanding, I haven't used them extensively, is that you can intercept the browser's requests for files and do something else instead. So you could definitely, with a Service Worker, receive a request that says, okay, I want these like 150 modules. And then you can say like, well, hold on, we already have 120 of them, and then modify the request to only request the 30 modules you're missing or whatever.
Right.
And so a Service Worker could definitely be helpful in that case if you're trying to load the modules over HTTP. The problem with Service Workers is that they're not really well supported in a lot of browsers. So even in a world where Service Workers are used for some of the module caching, you're still going to want a fallback solution, for example, for Safari.
Yep.
And then the approach that we're currently using in the beta is to use local storage or IndexedDB to cache the modules. So they're still cached persistently across browser refreshes the same way you would get from a Service Worker. And IndexedDB has the advantage that it has more space than local storage does, so we can cache more modules. But the advantage is they work across a wider range of browsers. So basically, there's some combination of all these different caching mechanisms that might end up with the optimal thing. But Service Workers are definitely not like a end-all solution for all caching.
Right. Yeah, and I can see that it would be different performance characteristics depending on your app, depending on whether it's mobile. And I've also heard people say that HTTP2, although in theory it should have, you should be able to load all of them, every module, like hundreds of them, independently, separately by HTTP and not have to worry about the performance problem of setting up a new connection and tearing it down. I've also heard that that's not true in practice. I did an interview with James Hush from the NFL on the Hashbang podcast, and he was talking about that. They tried that and then moved away from it. So, But I think what's really cool is that I'm assuming this is just a implementation detail in Meteor, because the second really cool thing about this, I think, is that you just don't configure it. It just works, right? So
that's
you
right.
Upgrade to Meteor 1.5. You can just start using your async import. You can just do a wait import, and then it just works, right? So you don't have to care or configure how it works. And if I assume if it changed or even became dynamic based on something smart, then it's no work for the developer, right?
That's right. And the cool thing here, I think, that enables us to have a even lower configuration experience than other types of systems is that one of the benefits we're looking to leverage is that the Meteor is actually running a server, right? So if you can run an actual web server, which you might already be doing because you might be doing server-side rendering, for example, there's no reason not to have that server also handle shipping modules to the client. Mm-hmm. So, depending on your situation, you might want to serve some stuff over a CDN and maybe some stuff over this dynamic module loading thing. But basically, by somewhat coupling the build system and the thing that's actually providing those files to the browser, you can achieve a much higher level of convenience because we can just change all those parts at the same time, so you don't have to like do anything to migrate from 1.4 to 1.5. Whereas if you were using Meteor as like a standalone build system and then hosting those modules on your own, then you might have to do something different to start getting the benefits of dynamic imports. And the other really cool thing is, sorry, one more thing here, which is personally, as a person who works at MDG as a company, I like the synergy between this kind of dynamic module loading and having a scalable hosting platform like Galaxy, for example, because you can just scale up your module loading by scaling up your containers. So you don't have to like separately think about how am I going to scale up my like file serving versus my whatever else, because it handles the same kinds of questions about whether that's WebSockets or persistent connections or whatever.
Interesting. I wonder if there's anything that that Galaxy would be in a position to do better than a more generic hosting as well.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we're actively exploring.
Cool. So how about code reloading? Would this have any effect on hot module reloading in development? Like maybe reloading only the changed modules?
Yeah, that's definitely a question I've been thinking about as well. So there are also a couple of different things here. One is when people talk about hot module reloading these days, they're often referring to this thing that Dan Abramov created, which works with Webpack to individually reload individual modules. And the thing about that is it definitely is not transparent. Like the packages you're using, the frameworks you're using, the code you write has to, at some level, be aware of hot module reloading for it to actually work. Because you definitely are doing some setup. Like when your app starts up, you might be setting some variables or some flags. You might have some state you want to persist or not persist. So it's even if we're rebuilding modules individually and we're sending modules individually to the client, that doesn't necessarily solve the question of like how do you restart just part of your app, and that does require a lot of effort on the end developer.
Okay.
However, I can imagine this making reloading the client side of your app much faster because you can perhaps still cache those modules. So you can imagine a world where like your browser still restarts, but after it restarts, it just loads all the code from memory because it was already there because we know which part changed. So that definitely could be an interesting thing.
Yep. Cool. Okay. That's awesome. I'm really excited about that. So
yeah, one thing that I'm also really excited about, just to slot it in here, is like the dynamic imports are in a lot of ways like a primitive in the sense that I don't imagine that a year from now or something, people will be writing, will be managing their dynamic imports manually, right? Once you have the ability to load modules at will, you can imagine a lot of convenience features that do that for you automatically. Like one standout thing right now is Next.js, which is like this server-side rendering and module code splitting framework thing. And they've implemented a thing, as far as I understand, that does automatic splitting for you at the route level. So depending on which route of your app you're in. And that's definitely one approach that you could build on top of Meteor's dynamic imports, for example. Or you could build a whole bunch of other approaches, like make it automatically determine which modules are expensive and rewrite your code to do a dynamic import there. So I think there's the technical questions of how the module loading is achieved and how it works, and that has to be super solid. And then there's the developer experience question, which hasn't really been gotten into yet on a deep level.
Yeah, there was another thread that talked about lazy loading React components, which is really awesome. And the thing I really liked in there was sort of a proof of concept or idea about using a higher order component to wrap your other components and load them lazily. So yeah, I think there's going to be some really nice probably packages that people will come up with on top of this. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm very excited. Is there anything else with regards to Meteor 1.5 that we should talk about? Any other features that
No, yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of work to do there still, and I think a lot of improvements to come. But I think it's going to be a really significant release.
Cool. Well, I love that it's actually like pushing the curve again by using something that is going to be standard. And I think Meteor was like the first major framework to be using the import syntax from ES 2015. And anyway, Meteor developers were the first people I knew that were like really actively embracing it and using it. Some other people had to do a lot of work to get there. And I think it's the same thing with this. So that's cool.
Yep.
So try it out, and if you notice any bugs, then the GitHub issue would be the place to post that. Cool. Okay. So maybe this is a good segue to something that was asked about in the announcement thread for the show, which is the Meteor team's longer term vision and hope for Meteor. So the question was specifically, actually this is a few questions, but I'll just quote it. I'll just read it. Where do you see Meteor 5 years from now? What areas of the overall web development ecosystem do you guys feel are lacking the most right now? If you had all the resources in the world, what would you do with them? That's three, but I guess it's really the same question.
Yeah, so I think there's I don't think there are any surprises here. I think we've worked pretty hard in the last 6 months to make sure that anything that we're doing with Meteor is not surprising to people who are following along. So hopefully this is exactly what you were expecting, which is our goal with Meteor is to bring people modern JavaScript in you could say an effortless way. So basically, I think you brought up a great example, which is like you could, there came out a version of Meteor that said, we support ES 2015 imports now, full stop. And what that meant was you could use that version of Meteor and you could definitely use imports everywhere. No questions asked, no configuration, no settings, no picking which version of imports you want. You go and you read, well, I was going to say you read the language spec, but probably you don't. You go and read the documentation on MDN. It's my favorite documentation site, the Mozilla Developer Network. You go read what imports are supposed to do. You type that code in Meteor, and then it always works. You don't have to be like, how do imports work in Meteor? Well, the answer is they work the same exact way that the language spec says they should work.
Right. No messing around with Babel RC files or anything else. That's right.
And at the same time, I think the modules thing was cool because it also interoperates, for example, with previous code, right? So, as an example, if you had code that was being eagerly loaded, as we call it, so you had it in like the root of your application where everything was loaded like alphabetically, you could actually just put one import in there and say, oh, actually this file that starts with the letter A depends on this file that starts with the letter Z. And then it would figure it out and it would reorder those files for you, even though you didn't have to convert the entire thing to use imports. Actually, I don't know how many people were aware of that feature, so that's another question, is how we should communicate all this stuff. But like today, often I'll be writing a Meteor app, and I won't even like mess around with putting stuff in the imports directory. I'll just put imports wherever I need to ensure the order. So I guess what I'm trying to say is like backwards compatibility and like making sure that you can add this new feature easily to your existing code is like also a really big thing. So in terms of where the web ecosystem is lacking and where we could go 5 years from now, hopefully, 1 year from now, 2 years from now, maybe 5 years from now, Meteor is the best place to go to get a predictable, well implemented, well functioning, performant, simple, no configuration JavaScript application. Like step one, you want to write JavaScript. You don't want to do anything else. You fire up your Meteor app, you write the JavaScript code, and it works exactly the way you expect. Yep. And maybe under the hood, it's doing some code splitting, or there's some deployment going on. There's client-server code. We don't have to worry so much about that. And I think that's a bit more focused, I think, than what Meteor has been in the past, which is it's also often tried to include a lot of different convenience libraries or utilities for building up your app. And I think focusing on this particular thing, which is, like we've always called it a JavaScript platform. Focusing on the platform aspects of that is kind of where we're going. So yeah, build performance, application speed, JavaScript features that people need, stuff like that.
So I think one thing that always makes me think of, because I think I mention it every time, but is moving towards NPM, which is definitely happening with good momentum, which is it's great. So do you think that's something that's going to be top priority to moving completely to NPM?
I think that's one of the things that has to happen for Meteor to become a lot more mainstream than it is today. Right. It's definitely a shame that whenever you ask somebody to try out Meteor, they have to first go to the Meteor website and copy and install script. Right. To be honest, that's something that freaks me out every time I try Yarn. I'm like, I go to the Yarn website and I'm like, you mean I can't NPM install Yarn? Like, what is this? I think you can, but they don't recommend it or something. But anyway, I do agree that while I think for existing Meteor developers, I think right now the experience of using NPM in Meteor is not so bad. Like, you can definitely use pretty much any package I know of that you would want to use from NPM. But I think specifically for introducing new developers and reducing the amount of new things they have to think about,
especially if they come from the existing JavaScript ecosystem, they're used to using NPM. You don't have to explain why to use Meteor NPM.
That's right.
For example.
Yeah, and that comes with some questions, right? It's like, how valuable is it, for example, that Meteor locks you into, well, it's either valuable or a drawback, depending on who you ask, that Meteor locks you into a specific version of Node, for example, in NPM, right? Like, is it useful that you're tied to a particular version, which means that your code will work consistently, or is it a drawback because you want the new features in the new node and you want to be able to control which version you're using? And those are the kinds of questions we're going to come up against with NPM. Then there's some like more minor things like moving some of the Meteor core packages to NPM, but that will also be interesting. But I think the way we look at it is primarily as a way to get new people interested in Meteor. And like that will be how we prioritize it internally. But if people have ideas or contributions about how to get that done faster, then we always welcome that as well. There's definitely a question of what we're prioritizing as we're listening to customers and stuff like that, and what people in the community want. And ideally, we can have both and work on them at the same time.
I like that. That's a great. That's your vision set out very clearly. That's cool.
Yeah, and one thing we're working on, slower than I thought. As always, things happen. Is redesigning the website a little bit. So I think right now the website doesn't set out this vision, but it should. Not that people go to the website very frequently once they're already using Meteor, but for people who show up, explaining to them what we're trying to do here, I think is pretty important, and we could be doing a much better job of that than we are today.
Good. I'm looking forward to hearing that. Reading that. And then I guess one thing that notably doesn't include, which I'll just mention because a few people commented on the announcement thread for this post, is just about Apollo. And so that vision embraces Apollo or anything else you want, and it doesn't make Meteor a way to convert you. It doesn't get you moving over to Apollo unless Apollo makes sense for you, just like any other JavaScript tool that you wanted to add to your app. So I think that's right.
We definitely like we've said before, found out that existing Meteor developers who are used to the convenience of the DDP and live data system, which still works great, and we're still updating and making sure people are submitting lots of pull requests to update with new Mongo features and stuff. People who are used to that convenience are not super hyped about Apollo, right? If you talk to somebody who's used to REST APIs, they're like, wow, Apollo is like so great, saves me so much code, so easy. And then you talk to somebody who's coming from Meteor and they're like, this is so much work. I have to write all this extra code. This is so hard. And I understand both perspectives. So,
but But your vision is that Meteor is becoming more flexible and just a base for whatever you want. So I like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that actually might be another good segue to another question, which was, or a popular thread, which was about potentially getting rid of the imports directory at some point. Somebody brought up that back when the imports feature was it Meteor 1.3? No, 1. Yes, 1.3. Yeah, 1.3. When 1.3 came out, that I think you mentioned, or the announcement of it mentioned that one day the globally accessible old way of doing things might go away, and until then you have to put everything in the imports directory. So there was a thread discussing that and just kind of asking about it. They had a suggestion about maybe having a globals package that would be added instead of just being default global. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think while in some cases, having global variables can be convenient, I think it's pretty clear that the way people write JavaScript code today involves using imports, and so I think it's reasonable for Meteor to make that the default at some point. I don't know if that's exactly 1.5 or something. The thing that's nice about 1.5 is that it gives you a great incentive to work with imports, because now you can actually use those imports to split your code. So I think one thing to emphasize is we're obviously never going to do something that means you can't just update to Meteor 1.5 immediately with your existing code. So I think this would be more of what is the default experience for new developers. And if you're used to NPM and you're coming from the rest of the JavaScript ecosystem, which are definitely the kinds of people we want to start using Meteor more and more, I think you definitely would expect to have everything work with modules. So I think it's a great idea to come up with a way that will both make existing code bases happy, because you don't have to rewrite anything, but also make the experience for people coming from the rest of JavaScript as nice as possible, and as little, the least surprising thing that can happen. I think globals package is a good idea. There's also the idea of creating the same way we used to have an imports directory, creating a globals directory or something.
Yeah.
But I think the exact details are something just to be figured out. I don't think it's going to be there's no big internal changes to make or something. I think it's basically just a regular expression that's is this file an import or is it not? And then we just change that expression or change the way a package works or whatever.
Right. Okay. Well, we are getting a little bit tight on time. There was a ton of other stuff that I wanted to cover, but maybe there's a just browse quickly over them. There was a thread about the best practices for migrating Atmosphere package to NPM. So this would be a good topic for the Meteor guide or something.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a thing that that could be a lot easier. In that, we're definitely signaling to people that NPM is the best place to put their packages. And when you have packages that depend on some part of Meteor, it's pretty hard to make that work. So I think if we could figure out a way to make that happen without having to move everything everywhere to NPM, then that would definitely be great. And I think the right place to come up with proposals for that would be on GitHub. So forums are a great place to have discussions about use cases and stuff. But to get some code changed in the Meteor core, the best place is to find the right issue, look at we have some guidelines for what you might want to consider when you propose a new feature. And if you look at those guidelines, you'll see some questions maybe to answer about, how best to do that.
Okay. A few other things to mention, maybe not to discuss deeply then, I guess, but there was a thread about somebody kicking off an effort to create a Meteor performance guide. So if you have anybody that's got anything to add on that, if you've had any big Meteor app or done a lot of performance work with Meteor and you have something to contribute there, I think that would be really cool. Again, there's another one about creating a reference Docker image. So if you've had a lot of experience with that, you might want to weigh in on that. There were a couple cool things that people might want to check out. There was a Blaze instant code reload demo, and someone's working on a visual Meteor app. There's tons of stuff going on. But I think we're kind of out of time for today. So is there anything that I missed that was a big topic?
No, I think, some of those topics I'd also be happy to maybe just post a reply on the forum or something. Then people don't have to watch the whole video.
Okay, great.
Oh yeah, one piece of news is that we had a Meteor night last week, the first one in a while, and so there's going to be some pretty great talks and videos coming from that. One of which is about that Blaze instant reloading. So
Cool.
Keep an eye out for those on the YouTube channel.
Cool. I tried to watch it, but it was I think the waiting music got flagged by some automated
That's right.
checker or something, so it's temporarily down. Okay, looking forward to seeing that. Okay,
Cool.
awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sashko. If
Thanks, Paul.
anybody's
Thanks for setting this up.
Thanks. If anybody has other things to discuss, the forums is where we'll be. Thanks. See you next time.
See ya.